The next dropdown we have is the shading model dropdown, which is typically set to default lit, meaning it's being affected by the lights in the scene. If we wanted to make this not be affected by the lights, we can change it to unlit, and this will allow us to make this a glowing or emissive surface. But in order to do that, we're going to need to drive the emissive color input here. As you can see, when we set this to unlit, a lot of these inputs got grayed out, and that's because they're not needed for an unlit material. And this makes this material much more optimized. To drive the emissive color, we can use a texture map, or we can use a color value. So I'm just going to hold 3 on the keyboard to create a color value and left click, and it will drive that into the emissive color. Double click the black swatch and set our color value. Some of the other shading models we have access to include subsurface scattering shading for skin and candles. We also have clear coat for cars, as well as two-sided foliage, good for plants and whatnot. And then we have hair, cloth, and eye shading models. In this course, we're only going to cover the unlit shading model and the subsurface shading model. But if you'd like to see demonstrations of the other shading models, be sure to check out my advanced course on PBR shading. To demonstrate subsurface scattering, I've loaded up a level from our assets called Subsurface Scattering. You'll find it in the content browser under Maps. The scene is composed of 2 lights and an object here, a vase, and we're going to apply our subsurface scattering material to this. In fact, it's already applied, but we have to actually build it. You'll find the material under Content, Materials, and here it is, M Subsurface. We'll go ahead and double-click that to open it. So obviously the first thing we want to do is change the shading model to subsurface. From here we're going to need 4 material expressions to plug into our result node here. 2 of them will be colors and the other 2 will be scalar parameters. So we're going to hold down the 3 key to create our 2 colors. And then we'll pipe in the first one to base color and we'll pipe in the second one to subsurface color. We'll double click the subsurface color and we're going to change it to a nice bright red. And for the base color, we're going to change that to kind of an orangish, maybe something green. Let's try something green. This way we can really see the difference. Now we need our 2 scalars, so I'm going to hold down the 1 key and create the 2 scalars. The first one's going to go into roughness, and the second one into opacity. For roughness, we'll give it a value of something low, like 0.1. And for opacity, we're going to go ahead and leave it at 0 for now. Now, to explain this, the opacity will control how much light scatters in your object. With an opacity of 0, all light will scatter in the object. And because of this, you'll see the subsurface effect much more prominently. If we were to set this to a value of 1, then that essentially disables subsurface scattering. For now, we'll leave it at a default value of 0. And of course, it can be anywhere in between 0 and 1. I'm going to right-click on roughness, convert that to a parameter. We'll call that roughness, and right-click on my opacity scalar here, convert to parameter, and call that opacity. All right, now we could do the same thing for the color values, but I'm not going to do that. We'll just save and compile our shader, and we're ready to apply it to our object. And you can see right away the difference there. It's very nice, the subsurface effect. So this would work really well on skin or a candle. Now, if I move this light around or rotate it, you'll be able to see the change as I do so. There we go. It looks like the light is kind of glowing through the object. Now, material instances are not part of this course, so if you'd like to learn more about how they work, be sure to check out my course on advanced PBR shaders. For now, I've already created the instance for you. It's this third shader here in the directory, mi_subsurface. Let's double click it to open it. And now we can tweak the values here without having to recompile the shader. So I'm going to turn on opacity and roughness. Actually, we don't really need roughness. I'm going to change opacity to 1, and you can see right away what that effect is. It's basically turning off the subsurface scattering. It's much, much less pronounced. And I can put it at a value of, say, 0.5. And that's a nice middle ground in between the two. And then again, back at 0. All right, so that's how subsurface scattering works. I know we used a new concept here with material instances. That will be covered more in detail in my advanced course on PBR materials. Now that we've had a nice deep dive into the material editor, including this last part on shading models, we're ready to begin building our first PBR shader from scratch.